Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the spine-chilling podcast, Horror Talks with Tate. My name is Tate and I'm your host for this podcast, and I cannot wait to talk to you all about another horror movie. In this podcast, as usual, we plunge into the depth of intricate plots, delve into rich character development, thematic elements, explore director's cuts, and so much more within the horror genre. Anyway, for this episode, we will be talking about the independent horror movie which is based on a beloved Disney character, Mickey Mouse. The movie is called The Mousetrap, and it follows Alex's 21st birthday until her and her friends are trapped in the arcade area with a killer dressed up as Mickey Mouse and wanting to play hide and seek with them. So everyone, let's head on to spooky summaries and discuss the plot details for the movie, The Mousetrap. The Mousetrap is a Canadian indie horror comedy that puts a slasher twist on Mickey Mouse after his copyright expired. The story follows a group of teens who gets trapped in a nostalgic arcade where a killer in a Steamboat Willie style Mickey Mouse begins hunting them down one by one. The movie uses absurdist humor, setting itself as a horror comedy with a satirical opening crawl that explicitly disconnects it from Disney. Much of the film relies on the novelty of transforming a beloved animated character into a horror villain as the masked killer unleashes mayhem on the trapped teens. While the movie aims for an offbeat, low-budget horror feel, it has received mixed reviews. The kills are not especially innovative, and the acting is generally rated as useless, giving the movie a campy, self-aware quality. However, for fans interested in experimental slasher flicks or public domain character adaptation, The Mousetrap could provide a unique, if rough around the edge, horror experience. Now that Spooky Summaries is completed, let's go to discrete directors and talk about the history of making The Mousetrap. The movie was directed by Jamie Bailey and was written by Simon Phillips. Jamie Bailey presents a unique, though divisive take on horror by turning the iconic public domain Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse into a menacing slasher character. Bailey's direction leans heavily into blending nostalgic elements with horror, creating a retro eerie arcade setting that invokes a strong 90s vibe. However, the film's execution has received mixed reviews. While the setting and vintage visual have been praised, critics note the storyline feels disjointed with patchy pacing and sometimes inconsistent performance from the cast. The humor, including some fourth wall breaking moments, feels out of place, undercutting the film's horror tone. Overall, Bailey's style in The Mousetrap seemed to aim for a campy, nostalgic horror that appeals to niche audience but may leave viewers expecting a serious slasher disappointed due to its quirky approach and lack of depth in the plot. The film cast includes actors like Sophie Mikitosh, Callum Swake, Algra Nosita, Ben Harris, Demokovic, and Simon Phillips as Mickey Mouse. The movie is part of a new trend of horror films reimagining classic characters in terrifying contexts, made it possible as early Mickey Mouse iteration entered the public domain. This film also includes a disclaimer clarifying that it is not connected with Disney, as it only uses the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse. In The Mousetrap, The acting styles takes a comedic and exaggerated approach to horror, leaning heavily into the absurdity of a killer dressed as Mickey Mouse in an arcade setting. This low-budget horror comedy relies on exaggerated expressions and reactions from the cast, enchanting the film's campy and surreal tone. Simon Phillips, who plays the killer, Mickey, brings a mix of menacing and darkly humorous traits to his role, channeling the eeriness of a masked teleporting figure with unsettling horror genre clicks. The other actors also improvise melodramatic reactions, capturing the chaotic atmosphere of being hunted by a seemingly supernatural character in a confined carnival-like space. The actor's style contributes to the blend of parody and horror, reminiscent of recent genre, dread, that combines public domain characters with horror for shock valves, like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. The performances are intentionally over the top to match the slasher film's usual premise and add to its cult potential among fans of horror comedy crossovers. The Mousetrap follows a classic slasher narrative structure with a unique twist by incorporating the horror reimagining of Mickey Mouse. The story centers on a group of friends who sneaks into a amusement arcade after hours, only to find themselves stalked by a masked killer wearing a Mickey Mouse costume. The killer, portrayed as a brutal figure with some supernatural abilities, traps them in a nightmarish game that involves survival challenges. As the group tries to escape, they set traps and utilize the arcade environment to fight back, but the killer's strategic moves and strength ultimately results in many gruesome deaths. The film presents an unreliable narrator, Rebecca, the only survivor, who recounts the events to detectives. Her version of the story leaves gaps, casting suspicion on her potential involvement, though a post-credit scene hints that the Mickey Mouse killer is still alive and possibly returning, leaving her story and the characters shrouded in ambiguity. The scene setting of the Mousetrap is a dark, eerie twist on a usual cheerful world of Mickey Mouse. It reimagines Mickey's surrounding as decades and hauntingly familiar. Think of the iconic location, like the clubhouse or Minnie's garden, but transformed with a sense of desolation. There might be shadowy flickering lights and echoes that carries an ominous tone. Classic Mickey items like gloves or hat could appear misplaced or worn, adding to the suspenseful and distorted ambience. This setting plays on nostalgia in a way that feels foreboding, leading audience to feel both intrigued and uneasy. The music and sound design for the Mousetrap effectively turn a familiar cheerful tone of Mickey Mouse's world into something sinister and unsettling. The soundtrack likely combines distorted or minor key versions of classic Mickey Mouse tunes with eerie ambient soundscapes that builds suspense and a creepy sense of dread. Sounds associated with Mickey's traditional environment, like squeaks or cheerful jingles, might be transformed to sound dissonant or jarring, enchanting the horror atmosphere. Each scene likely employs sound effects that reflects a darkly twisted version of Mickey's classic world. For example, footsteps might echo in an unnatural, hollow way, while doors creaking slowly and subtle audio cue, whisperings or faint laughters could create a pervasive feeling of being watched. This kind of sound design, which blends unsettling music with immersive sound effects, would amplify the horror aspect of the Mousetrap while still subtly referencing Mickey's familiar universe. The Mousetrap is a recent horror film featuring a dark twist on an iconic character, Mickey Mouse, marking one of the first adaptations using the original Steamboat Willie version of Mickey after it entered the public domain in the beginning of 2024. The film, directed by Jamie Bailey, sought to blend nostalgic horror elements with a gritty slasher narrative. It permanently takes place in a 90s inspired arcade, bringing a retro vibe that appeals to fans of vintage horror settings. Production was swift, with filming completed in just 8 days at an amusing center of Ottawa, Canada. Although the Mousetrap is officially linked to Disney's original Mickey design, the filmmakers were cautious to avoid more recent Mickey elements still under copyright, making sure the masked antagonist only subtly referenced the beloved character. The movie mixed horror with campy humor, often breaking the fourth wall. It also has a supernatural spin, with Mickey displaying teleportation and other eerie abilities. Despite its novelty, the Mousetrap faced criticism for its pacing, acting mismatch, and lack of depth, with reviewers comparing it unfavorable of other horror films featuring public domain characters. The film was released on demand in the 6th of August 2024 and has sparked debate, particularly about the implication of using once protected characters in horror. Though mixed in reception, it stands as a unique attempt to explore familiar icons in an unsettling new light. The budget of the movie was $800,000 and the box office was $60,595. About the ratings, the Mousetrap received the IMDb score of 2.5 out of 10 and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 19%. The Mickey Mouse horror film, The Mousetrap, has not received any notable awards or nomination. Despite its unique premise, a horror reimagining of Steamboat Willie with Mickey Mouse in a slasher role, the movie garnered largely negative reviews. Critics criticized the story, performance, and overall execution, which was compared unfavorably to similar horror films like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. This reception has impacted its visibility in awards circle. In The Mousetrap, the horror approach with Mickey Mouse brings an eerie contrast between his classic persona and a chilling, suspenseful environment. Here's a breakdown of some standout elements for props, weapons, and CGI. Starting with props. Oversized mousetrap. A massive industrial-style mousetrap acts in a symbolic and literal threat, setting a tense tone throughout. Vintage carnival objects. Items like rusty Ferris wheel model, fading carnival signs, and eerie funhouse mirrors add an unsettling, nostalgic edge. And finally, haunted house accessories. Props such as cobwebbed furniture, flickering old lanterns, and dusty old-fashioned radio emitting static amplifies the creepy atmosphere. Now for weapons. Knives. The knife which Mickey uses is a key, unsettling props that transforms an everyday object into a source of horror. It's designed as a large, sleek, yet menacing kitchen knife. Classic hammer. Mickey wields a hammer at moments to amp up suspense. Its exaggerated cartoonish size now twisted into something intimidating. Cheese baits and tools. Cheese loaves and sharp kitchen tools give a sinister twist to traditionally innocent props, hinting at looming dangers in subtle ways. Now for CGI. Shadow effects. CGI amplifies Mickey's shadow with distorted properish, creating a disturbing effect that enchants his character's menacing present. Facial expressions. Mickey's classic expressions morph in unnatural ways, exaggerated with CGI to give him an eerie, almost unrecognizable look during suspenseful scenes. These choices allow the Mousetrap to maintain a horror tone while playing with familiar Disney aesthetics, making Mickey Mouse's surrounding and actions creepingly unpredictable. In the Mousetrap, there's a chilling build-up that gives away hints of the story's dark turn. Here's a look of some of the main foreshadowing elements for the Mousetrap. Number 1. The innocent setting turned dark. The movie begins with the usual cheerful ambience of Mickey's world, but there are small unsettling details, like flickering lights or sudden silence, that suggest something isn't right. These moments signals that there's more to the setting than meets the eye. Number 2. Subtle changes in Mickey's behavior. Early on, Mickey starts behaving slightly off, with moments where he pauses mid-action as if something else has his attention. These are cues to the audience that he's not fully himself, hinting at an impending possession or psychological struggle. Number 3. Distorted music and classic reference. As Mickey explores classic tunes associated with him starting playing in rapt, disturbing tone, this foreshadows his descent and hints that something is manipulating or haunting this iconic world. Number 4. Darkening color palette and shadows. The color palette subtly shifts to darker hues as Mickey approaches ominous areas in his environment, and shadows starts forming strange, ominous shapes. These visual cues foretells the lurking threat Mickey will face. These foreshadowing techniques immerse the audience in a creepy undercurrent throughout the film, making the eventual horror elements feel both unexpected and inevitable. Now, horror fans, it's time to go to the last segment of this episode, Insane Insiders, and discuss the Easter eggs, fun facts, and the audience reviews for the Mousetrap. In the Mousetrap, a horror twist on the classic Mickey Mouse, there is only one Easter egg that adds layers to the horror story, which is classic cartoon reference. Scenes from Mickey's early cartoons, like Steamboat Willie, are reimagined in creepy, abandoned settings. For example, the iconic Steamboat appears rusted and decrepit, symbolizing Mickey's lost innocence. That Easter egg adds to the creepy nostalgia, blending Mickey's wholesome history with the unsettling horror of the Mousetrap. Here are some fun facts about The Mousetrap, the horror movie reimagining of Mickey Mouse, directed by Jamie Bailey. Number 1. Public domain inspiration. The idea for The Mousetrap stemmed from the iconic 1928 cartoon Steamboat Willie, which introduces Mickey Mouse. With Steamboat Willie entering the public domain in January 2024, creators saw an opportunity to reimagine the beloved character as a villain in a horror setting. Number 2. Plot and setting. The story involves around Alex, who is working late in an amusement arcade on her 21st birthday. Her friends surprised her, but their celebration turns deadly when a masked killer dressed as Mickey Mouse decides to hunt them down in a twisted game. Number 3. Filming location and style. The Mousetrap was filmed in Ottawa, Canada, and has a retro arcade theme ambience that pays homage to the setting of Steamboat Willie through eerie projection and vintage horror vibes. The director described the project as a fun and ridiculous twist on Mickey's character, embracing the absurdity of a once innocent character turning deadly. Number 4. Cast and character. Simon Phillips, who also wrote the screenplay, stars as the killer Mickey, and he's joined by a cast that includes Sophie McIntosh and Ben Harris. The killer's costume retains some of Mickey's traditional elements, giving it a twisted, sinister look. And number 5, the growing dread. The Mousetrap joins a dread of public domain characters' horror adaptations, much like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, where others once wholesome characters are reimagined in the horror genre, appealing to fans of nostalgic horror with a twist. If you're interested in more of this slasher twist to Disney nostalgia, you can check it out on video on demand platforms where it's currently available. Audience reactions to The Mousetrap, a horror film featuring a homicidal Mickey Mouse, have been mixed, highlighting both the movie's novelty and its missed potential. The film setting in a 90s themed arcade provided nostalgic charm, but the horror elements failed to make full use of Mickey's iconic background. While Steamboat Willie references a chilling rendition of Turkey in a Straw briefly evokes Disney's early era, viewers felt these callbacks could have played a bigger role in the horror aspect. Instead, some found the horror sequences thin and the connection to Mickey's lore superficial, reducing the film's impact as a slasher. Critics also noted that while Simon Phillips' performance as the masked Mickey brought an eerie presence, inconsistent pacing, filler scenes, and an awkward humor detracted from the overall suspense. Some reviewers pointed out that the use of a low-budget vintage Mickey mask wasn't effective in creating the intended horror atmosphere, which detracted from the scares. In general, The Mousetrap appeals to fans of quirky horror with a nostalgic edge, but may not satisfy those looking for a more substantial or genuinely terrifying experience. However, a sequel, The Mousetrap: Welcome to the Mickeyverse, is expected to come out in 2025, potentially addressing some of these criticisms. Before we wrap up today's episode, I'm going to tell you all about my thoughts and reviews for The Mousetrap. I have to say, I do enjoy this movie just as much as Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. It has this perfect blend of humor and horror that kept me hooked the entire time. I was genuinely surprised to see Steamboat Willie enter the public domain, paving the way for a wild reinterpretation with a twist, turning an innocent icon into a nightmare. Watching a killer in a Mickey Mouse mask stalking victims was as unsettling as it was darkly entertaining. If you're into horror takes on classic childhood characters, this film is definitely one you'll want to check out. It's the kind of movie that gives you nostalgia with a sinister edge, making it both disturbing and fun to watch. Well, this concludes today's episode of Horror Talks with Tate. Thank you so much for listening and discovering the Mickey Mouse horror movie called The Mousetrap. I cannot wait to see the sequel when it comes out around next year, as it's expected to. And I will be back next time to talk about a Christmas horror movie because it's December. Make sure to follow, rate, and review this podcast to grow more horror fans like yourself. If you want to stay tuned for more episodes and exciting news, go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to keep your eyes on them. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for the episodes, which I am finally working on right now. And I'm so excited for you guys to watch the videos. Oh, and don't forget to follow me on TikTok as well for spooky and funny horror videos so that you'll be able to laugh or be spooked. If you see a killer in a Mickey mask, do not trust him because he loves playing tricks on you. Thank you so much for tuning in, horror fans. And as always, stay spooky, and I'll see you next time.